We want to talk today a bit about sports advocacy, and we're going to use the Clean Water Sports Alliance as an example, as a case study at how you may want to do it and how organisations can join together to be more effective and more targeted in how they get the change that they need. So with me today, as Craig said, I've got Siobhan Thomas, Greg Spencer and Phil Brownlie. So Siobhan is from GB Outrigger and is the secretary and also an executive director there. Greg is a non-exec director at Paddle UK, as well as being the governance manager at UK Deaf Sport. And Phil is the head of public policy at Swim England. So starting with you, Phil, at the end, it'd be great if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and about your role.
Yep, so hi, as Sam says, Philip Brownlie, Head of Public Affairs at Swim England, so I lead our lobbying and influencing work, which is primarily around access to sports, access to facilities, bricks and mortar swimming pools, which are closing up down the country, around school swimming, water safety, trying to make sure every child leaves school able to swim when we're currently miles off that, and then the one that we're chatting today in the open water space, and the work we do through the Clean Water Sports Alliance, the campaign for cleaner waters, be that rivers, seas, lakes, and an end to the sort of scourge of sewage pollution that we've seen so much of in recent years.
Fab. On to you, Greg.
Greg Spencer. I've been involved with Paddle UK since the days it was British Canoeing, if not when it was the British Canoe Union. And over the last 12 years, I've had a lot of volunteer roles, including as a waterways advisor, and I've seen the evolution of our clear access, clear water campaign, and things like the Outdoors for All connections, as well as what we're talking about today. And access has been the number one priority of our members for a very, very long time. Previous chief exec led a range of consultations maybe 10 years ago, and it wasn't just the number one priority of our members, it was so far ahead of everything else that they all paled into it.
My name is Siobhan Thomas, and I'm an executive director of Great Britain Outrigger. I'm also secretary of the federation, and my role is to take care of governance and advise people on governance, but also to do other things like work on strategy and development. And one of the things we work hard on is making people aware of what the sport of outrigger is. So if you don't know and you've seen Chief of War on Apple TV and Jason Momoa, you'll sort of get an understanding of where the sport comes from. And one of the interesting things about the sport is its foundations in Pacific culture. So haka, hula, lei making, as well as traditional chants and celestial navigation all form a formative part of this sport and how it's enacted around the world. And this raises interesting questions for governance, because suddenly, instead of having a 5-year strategic plan, you're thinking about what is a 100-year strategic plan and what are the cultural and heritage foundations of the sport. Of course, water is incredibly important in all of that, and you can't really have a water sport without clean water, because it's not safe to be on. It's a pretty big given that water is the thing that we shouldn't be negotiating on. It's ridiculous that we're even having this conversation. So when we were able to become part of the Clean Water Sport Alliance with Swim England, RYA, Paddle UK, British Rowing, there's Phil.
There's lots of triathlon, outrigger, kite sports, sub-aqua, there's a whole range of us that are doing above, on and underneath the water as well.
Yeah, it was exciting to give a voice to elite athletes performing, but also recreation athletes who are going to be in water. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. I wasn't going to get any of you to try and list all the organisations of the Clean Water Sports Alliance, but if anyone can in the audience...
British Triathlon, did we mention British Triathlon?
Yeah, we did. If anyone can in the audience, I would say there's extra points on the app, but I can't have that list.
Like, Phil has QR codes on his back, and you just run up to him.
Yeah, if you got to Phil, he can just try and list them off for you. But just to catch people up in the room, because I know some of you are aware of what the Clean Water Sports Alliance is. Phil, would you be able to give us a bit of an introduction as to what it is and how it came about?
Yeah, sure. So it's a current scale of 11 sporting NGBs that all have a shared interest or use of the water in some way or another. And how it came about was the recognition that we all shared one thing in common, which was all our sports relied on, the seas, rivers, lakes. There are pitches and playing fields, and it'll be a national uproar and outrage if football couldn't take place because the football pitches are covered in sewage. So why should it be any different that our pitches and playing fields are in many cases unusable for many parts of the year? So to give some context, that in the last year alone, there was 3.6 million hours of discharges of sewage into our rivers, seas and lakes, which is, a crazy number. That's enough time to watch every single episode of Friends that was ever made on loop over 40,000 times, or to put it another way, to watch one episode of Columbo, the old detective series. So that gives you some sense of the scale of the problem. So we recognised that and thought we all had an interest in all individually trying to do something about that. And we thought much more powerful, much better way to do it is to try and come together and do that as a united front. So that was the motivation really to bring us all together and form the Clean Water Sports Alliance.
No, fab. And sort of from coming together, I know you said it benefited all of the organisations. It would be great to sort of know a bit more about how you manage the kind of different sizes of organisations. Because obviously, Swim England is a pretty massive NGB going around. But how did you manage the relationship with someone like GB Outrigger, Siobhan?
I think it's really interesting because we came from a standpoint of looking at shared synergy and respecting differences. And very, very early on, we made the decision that our conversations would be about the things that are meaningful to us and meaningful to our athletes and to our sports. And it's very easy to have these types of conversations if you're focused on a goal, which in our case was clean water and having, as Phil mentioned, having water areas that are safe for our athletes. So I don't think communication was ever really a problem. What is most important, I think, is respecting differences and respecting the fact that a lot of attention is given in the sporting world on quantity. But actually what is important is not just quantity, but quality. And sometimes if you're small, you have very interesting things to say and very interesting perspectives that get lost when you get bigger because you have different needs, like Noon said. So I think it was just knowing that we're speaking from the same standpoint, we're speaking a similar language. Also, the other thing is all of us had a very big learning curve. Like learning about how to measure water pollution is incredibly tricky, and there's lots and lots of different monitoring systems that are used to measure and report on water. And that was one of the asks we had, was to make things a lot more transparent and clear for the general public and for our users.
Yeah, so sort of understanding the metrics themselves before trying to push forward which metrics you wanted changing in order to have that clarity with that.
It's not even like that. That sounds so incredibly simple and so straightforward. And if that was the way it worked, it would be great. But everything is confusing. One water company reports in a certain way, another water company reports in a certain way. And sometimes they measure things, not even, you would expect, like with water, things are measured instantaneously and you know what the situation is on the water that you're going to go into. But actually what happens is you make a decision about whether your event can happen based on data that's provided maybe a week, even a month in advance. So sometimes these measures are not accurate, and it's incredibly frustrating if you're saying to juniors, oh, sorry, you can't go in the water because it's polluted, but that's actually data from, a really long time ago. So I think Phil can speak more about this, but that was one of our asks, was to just make this, take all of this confusing data and try and make it a little bit easier to understand.
I think as a group, I think it benefits from having that range of organisations of different sizes with different expertise. And I think there is hopefully, a lot of benefit, particularly maybe for some of those smaller organisations who then get access to expertise they may not have in their organisation. So I'm employed by somebody to do their lobbying and public affairs work, and that's my sort of area of expertise and experience. Well, lots of organisations, particularly small ones, don't have the resource to have something dedicated to just doing that kind of work. Yeah. So the hope that organisations who do have that kind of resource can lend a bit of that expertise, and in return, the expertise that's brought by individuals from some of those smaller organisations is invaluable to the group in other ways. So as a collective, it falls a really neat whole.
No, that's just in terms of not even understanding what you need to understand to start with sounds like a real hurdle to even get things. Do you know what I mean? Like it all coming in different ways. So it's like, can we just standardize it so we can understand it? But no, that sounds like a horribly wicked problem. You mentioned that as a collective, so we are the Sports Governance Academy. Lots of people here have governance roles. How do you govern this group? How does that work?
I'm happy to touch this. I'd say I'm a sort of politics geek, so normally I'm one of the nerdiest, least cool people in the room. So coming to a governance conference, I was delighted. I was like, maybe I won't be might not quite be the geekiest person in the room. But we deliberately went quite light touch when it came to the actual nuts and bolts governance of the alliance. We're much more we don't want it to become a barrier and get in the way of getting stuff done, essentially, whilst recognising there needs to be some mechanisms in place. So it's intentionally light touch, but we have a group that comes together and sets the direction. People can feed into that, and then there's like an approval process for this is the position of the alliance, and then we can go out and disseminate that. As and when things crop up, it's a perennial slight challenge of getting agreement on how we respond to things as a coalition. So we have a mechanism in place where not everyone has to sign on to everything the Clean Water Sports Alliance does. It can be something can be done as the Clean Water Sports Alliance, something can be done as these members of the Clean Water Sports Alliance if there's a particular issue that one or two might not agree with. But yeah, in terms of formal governance structures, it's relatively light touch. But we have come together as a group to work out the methods for getting new members on board, signing off like position statements on things, and part of our sort of thinking behind that was to keep the focus of the group intentionally tight. So we focus on sort of three things, and that helps because then it's very clear these are the three things we're focusing on. And the other thing was to keep the membership relatively tight. We thought there's lots of organisations out there doing fantastic work on environmental issues, be that Surfers Against Sewage, the End Sewage Pollution Coalition that we're members of as well. There's a plethora of amazing organisations doing kind of this, because we're like, what's our unique voice here? What's our unique selling point? And it is that we are sports governing bodies want to shout about the impact on sports and on human health. So that was our focus as a group. Again, by keeping those tight as well, it minimises some of those governance issues because we sort of stick to our lane, as it were, and not get sort of drawn in too many directions.
I think just to add to what Phil is saying, when we think about common language being water sports and water sports activities, a common language is also we're all involved in some guise in governance. So we're sort of had a little bit of an advantage on that front.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I know there are some Neds in the room. There are some Neds dialing in from online, and Greg, welcome along as well. In terms of your experience with the Clean Water Sports Alliance specifically, when did this first come as a board member, just to give some context to others in the room, when did this first come across your table?
Fairly late in the day. I think there is a big difference for us in that this is part of a much bigger thing. So advocacy as a thing started for us a very long time ago. The clean water, the clear access clean water type focus goes back a very long time, and then it's different connecting with different voices. Our voice originally was very, very isolated, and it was a whole network of different partnerships. So by the time we got as far as this particular one, it was almost routine to hear, oh yeah, NC, who's our lead in all of this, has formed another network and is amplifying our voice in another way. But Outdoors for All has been absolutely critical to engage. I mean, I think that's 50 plus organisations.
Yeah.
The land-based as well as the water-based type things, and having that different channel for different ways of reaching different audiences, where the overall goal is still, that whole thing about people being able to go out and enjoy our rivers and wherever else they want to go paddling. And obviously there are places where it isn't an issue, but we'd already done a whole load of work around things like invasive species and control of that. The Check Clean Dry campaigns are connecting with certain others because we transfer between waterways, but we didn't lump that in with this particular one. This one can have a nice tight focus. So realistically, from a governance point of view, by the time this one came along, we were quite accustomed to the concept.
So, look, if we're going to go a bit more big picture and look a bit more widely, as NGBs and other sporting organisations as well, why should advocacy matter from a strategic standpoint? And, how can organisations leverage this to achieve their goals of serving the people that they're members and the people that play and participate in their sports?
I have to think that. Well, first of all, because I've got 2 kids to put through college, so yeah, everyone should have public affairs professionals at any good. But beyond that point, there's things that as organisations you can control, and there's things as organisations that are outside of your direct control that might have a massive impact on the ability of your sports to continue. And so the way to try and influence change there is through advocacy, through influencing, through campaigning, all those tactics and work. So I think it's incredibly important. And as a sector, sport is, way behind many other sectors in terms of the number of people they have out there doing this kind of thing, lobbying, campaigning, influencing, because rest assured, if we're not, other people are, and then you're not part of the conversation. These things are happening, decisions being made that will affect and impact on your sport. So much better to be trying to influence and shape those conversations and having an impact than have things happen to you constantly. So, and if we think back to our members, particularly in the open water space, time and time again, we saw a massive explosion in the popularity of outdoor swimming, which is brilliant in recent years, because it's a wonderful activity. But time and again, we'd hear, what's the biggest barrier to participation? What's the biggest thing stopping you going? Oh, it's concerns around water quality. So there was a clear mandate from our members. They wanted us to be talking about issues like this. And if I think to the indoor world, loss of swimming pools up and down the country, our members, that is existential for our sport. So they want us, they almost demand us now. I think there's a growing sort of expectation almost in society amongst our members to be like using our voice and actually campaigning and having a stance on things. So I think it's absolutely essential, one, for the relationship between members, and two, from a practical existence of the sports capacity to be doing this kind of work.
Yeah, I would echo that 100%. I mean, like I said earlier, 10, 12 years ago when we did do the survey, it was the top thing was access and clean. We don't just want access to water, we want access to clean water. So there is a relationship with members thing. And one of the disconnects, if you go back a generation, was a sense that the governing body wasn't taking a leadership role in this area. And it did lead to a sense of alienation. There was a lack of sense of connection to the national governing body, to the point where, if we go back far enough, there was a rogue group, a rogue element called Crack, that led a mass trespass on the River Seant. A bit like the Kinder Trespass type thing, very, very militant in its approach. And the echoes of that rebellion against the lack of leadership from the national governing body lasted quite a long time. So, I mean, I was at an event yesterday where we were talking about the importance of national governing bodies connecting with their tribe. And I would actually say advocacy is not just how you connect with your tribe, it's also how you build your tribe. Mm-hmm. That sense that the sense of common purpose that we have around advocating for this is actually one of the reasons why we've actually got the tribe available to us that we've got available. That sense of connection is growing. So from the last session when we were talking about consistency and adaptability, that pivot that we've done has formed new connections, and now our consistency in delivering around that is part and parcel of the relationship building and what we're building on in the years ahead. And that platform that we did in the other work has enabled us to then diversify into all these partnerships. But yeah, fundamentally, I would say it is how you build your tribe.
Mm-hmm. I think it also allows you to shape the conversations that people have about things that are important to you. So, for instance, prior to some early work on Outdoors for All, the concept of blue space as a recreation space wasn't really considered in that way in government. It was that there's outdoor spaces and there's green spaces. So a lot of work early on was about making people aware of blue spaces and the importance they have for health and well-being, not just mentally, but physically. And if you think about on a daily basis, what is your access to water and how do you get to water and what kind of role does water play in your life? Like, for instance, every morning I walk in the park, but when I walk in the park, I'm walking along a waterway. And those kinds of things, which are really, really important to people's lives, we're getting lost in governmental conversations. So I think one of the interesting things about lobbying and advocacy is that you can start to shape a conversation that people are going to have about the spaces that the nation uses.
So for some people in the audience, if you've got to a point, you've gone, all right, I've identified this problem that we have, and this goes beyond something that we can solve. It needs governmental help because, like you say, Paddle UK can't fix the water quality of the entire UK, if only it were that easy. You're getting ready to go, you're getting ready to, maybe embark on hiring someone to do this for you. But then someone comes and stops you and goes, well, what are some of the risks of doing this? What are some of the risks of advocacy? It'd be great to hear a bit about some of the risks that come along with it.
I think there's risks with advocacy, no matter where you're doing your work. I mean, taking a different hat for a moment, as a governance manager with UK Deaf Sport, we've got Deaf Olympics happening next week in Tokyo. Deaf Olympics goes back 100 years and athletes go out regularly. But it's since the build up to 2012, it's never been funded. So we're in this position as a recognised national governing body, as part of the National Disabled Sports Organisations, and the only people we can really get to change this is actually the group that funds us through Sport England. So it's a very delicate position, but if we don't provide leadership in this thing, then the deaf community will be letting them down, and B, we're not going to build a tribe there. But providing leadership in that campaign is really, really important. But we've got to judge this right, because we want enough pressure to actually get change, otherwise we're wasting our time. But actually, we want to work with people. So there's a lot of very delicate decision making to be made. And when the all-party parliamentary group opportunity came up recently, that was very, very delicate. You've got a lot of conversations going on in the background about how to pitch it, and then maybe some strategic changes in what our focus is over the next few months, because we hadn't seen that APPG possibility coming up. We hadn't envisaged being on sports agents being broadcast to the nation and on telly and all the rest of it. And all of a sudden, things have gone crazy. Now, from a risk management point of view, there's a lot of focus all of a sudden, but you can't concentrate on everything all at once. So you never know when your breakthroughs are going to come. So you've got to have contingency, and this is where your skilled adaptability, coming back to the other thing, comes to the fore. You really do need to be ready to be very, very agile in this space.
If I was to come out and say, first point would be to say the risk of not doing it far, far, far outweigh any risk you do, would be my firm message to get across. But I think your points around positioning are very crucial, I think, because lobbying advocacy in general is like a whole spectrum, if you like, from sort of legal challengey activism right out here to sort of like, don't lobby because they are actual gun, but like that insider arm's length advocacy behind the scenes sort of thing. Is where do you pitch yourself? Obviously, the further out you go on the sort of activism game, and to qualify those comments, I think the most effective system is when you've got that whole range of actors, some playing the activisty role out here and some playing, because if you've got everyone having a nice cozy chat, then it's easy to be ignored. If you've got everyone out there sort of shouting and screaming and just telling the government they're awful all the time about everything, well then they'll just sort of ignore you. So I think we can't make you happy, we'll just ignore you because we're never going to make you happy. And so we try and pitch ourselves as that sort of constructive criticism, constructive friend role as NGBs, to work with governments or whoever we might be trying to influence, water companies or whoever it might be, but to try and actually deliver that change in a constructive way. Because the risk is, if you do get a reputation as just the sort of shouty people in the corner who just hurl abuse at whoever you're trying to target, they'll just ignore you. So there are risks all the time in how you deliver that, because the flip side to that is, for your members quite often, they want to see you being the most campaigny activist. Like, that's what gets the most sort of traction, but isn't necessarily the most effective way to get results. So it's like, that's the risk, is balancing the how do you approach it that sort of is effective but keeps people on side, and that's a perennial battle and challenge. And if I think specifically to the Clean Water Sports Alliance, there's another wrinkle and challenge for us within that, is that to get progress, shouting about how bad it is and painting the really bleak picture is the most effective way to get action and get people to take a seriously and do stuff. And we run into the risk of persuading people not to get in the water who otherwise would have got in the water, because there are plenty of opportunities where it's absolutely fine and safe and water quality is fine, but that's not the narrative in people's minds. So we get to a tipping point of, are we actually putting people off taking part in our sports and activities, which we'd hate to do, by our sort of advocacy and narrative work around the Clean Water Sports Alliance, which is, again, another thing we wrestle with and probably haven't quite got right balance and from a swimming perspective, certainly without, we are on the cusp of running the risk of dissuading people from getting the water. So there's perennial sort of challenges and risks and battles you're sort of working through all the time.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. On the first front, we're dealing with utility companies. Well, we actually want access to the reservoirs. We're one of the few countries in the world where, you've got all these bodies of water, often quite close to urban populations where people want to go, and getting access to reservoirs is proving really, really tough. But if we're going to get there, we need to be able to work with the utility companies. So if we spend our time just trying to pillory them for something to do with discharges into the rivers, that's not going to help.
But they make it so hard. They make it so hard. we try, but they make it so hard.
I mean, certainly one of the feedbacks we're getting is that, you know, people are reading particularly, for instance, about the water quality issues in the River Wye, which is probably the most popular river historically for doing recreational kayaking, canoeing. There's obviously lots of stories about chicken farming and agricultural runoff, and you know, the water quality issues there affecting the living things in the river. You know, that's been mainstream news for quite some time, and you're getting families where there's somebody interested in doing paddle sport, and they're actually saying, well, maybe we'll do some land sport instead. So we keep trying to amplify the issue, and at the same time, it's the same with the access thing. You know, one mantra that we can go on for the access is to say, well, there's so little in the inland waterways to which we've got an undisputed right of access. Or at the same time, you're trying to sell licenses to those areas, so that's all fine. But then there's all these other things, and actually we want people to go off and paddle all these other rivers. That's really that's where paddle sport lives. You know, by and large, it's the coastal bits, and then it's the faster flowing rivers. And if we give people the impression that they're not welcome in these places, we're really not doing what we need to be doing to grow the sport. So there's all sorts of trade-offs that need to be fairly delicately managed. We certainly occasionally got the messaging wrong, and you get the feedback when you look at why people aren't rejoining and that sort of thing.
And just one thing I'd like to touch on is how you deal with the uncertainty around it, because whilst you might have this great plan of, right, we're going to lobby government, they're going to do what we say, and we're going to have clean water, it's going to be great. So how do you deal with things, because you can't really measure how success is going until really the very, very end. How do you sort of deal around that uncertainty?
I think the honest truth is lots of people don't. It's not always comfortable for everybody. And this comes back perhaps to the last panel conversation. We know that there are lots of director level people and people in execs who like to have a nice neat plan. They've grown up in a world where you're almost measured on, do you have a nice clear plan? Have you got your vision, your mission, your objectives, all the rest of it? Have you got your roadmap into what you're going to deliver? Are you accountable for that at the end of that season? And that's their comfort zone. And when you get to advocacy, you can't have that. And I still vividly remember a former chief exec coming to me and just saying, well, Greg, what does success look like here? And as somebody coming from a background in sport where you always had a clear goal and you were setting your roadmap to it, that was his world. He was really, really uncomfortable with the fact that there was a major pillar of the strategy that had to be there because that's what the members wanted. And we certainly couldn't do it on our own. And we didn't know whether anybody could do it or how to do it. And you just keep having to probe and be responsive, be adaptable, build coalitions. You need to try lots of things and see what's going to work. And if you can't keep the board and everybody else going with you that this is the way to operate, you've got a really, really big problem. And ultimately, if you've got members that are expecting results, you kind of need to recalibrate how they're measuring progress. You know, we really need to be telling lots of little stories that show how the big picture is changing. So realistically, I can't believe how good a position we are in now compared with a decade ago. A decade ago, just about everything looked impossible. And what's happened is we've got really to the point where all sorts of amazing things are happening. Now, in terms of anybody actually being confident that in the near future there's going to be an improvement in water quality or in access position or anything else, nobody can say anything much on that. But the general mood 10 years ago was that if it ever came, if it was suddenly become an issue, we might well lose. And now we're saying, well, just bring it on, because actually, if this does suddenly end up in Parliament or whatever, we just feel that the tide is with us. So something fundamentally has shifted, but it's shifted in lots of little subtle ways that you couldn't have mapped in advance. So, yeah, and things like assessing the individual contribution and working out how much resource to pour into this is pretty challenging. You can't do evidence-based decision-making.
I think based on that is one really interesting thing that Greg is bringing up. Early on, we made a decision to stay focused on 3 simple goals, which Phil can speak more on. But it was keeping performance measures really light touch, but also keeping them focused. And one of the key successes I think we can have from the CWSA is that no one anticipated the amount of work it was going to end up taking. Everybody joined and thought, yes, we're going to work for it and work on this. But everybody's had to readjust their work plans and work schedules. So when we think about risk, I think, and risk management, one of the risks in risk management is thinking about the resourcing that might eventually be needed. But to go to Phil and Greg's point about trade-offs, you have the trade-offs, on the lobbying front, but you also have trade-offs organizationally, which is basically you're doing this thing, you want it to be really successful, you want people to engage, you want your board to engage, you want to be talking to water companies and lobbying Parliament and, writing press releases and doing these things, but that has a workload associated with it, which might not be mandated within your organization. So that was an interesting risk. But in terms of performance measures, I think the CWSA can say it's been pretty successful so far.
Yeah, all I heard was, it's impossible to quantify, which I'll remember for my next PDR of performance appraisal at work. I've got some senior people at work, so you can just remember that it's just impossible. But I think, joking about that is one of the challenges of our work is, all public policy work and influencing, it's years and years and years and years of banging your head against a brick wall, often feeling like you're making no progress, and then say you make a whole bunch of progress, and it can be slow again. But other times you've got to try and find ways to identify where you're chipping away at that wall, making practice and seeing incremental steps towards, a more positive future, which I do think, there definitely have been plenty in this area over the last sort of 2-3 years. So there's definitely things you can point to show that you're having some kind of impact. But yeah, it's very hard to directly quantify. We did this, so this happened, because it just, I'd love it if it was that neat to show, but it doesn't often work like that.
And there's another layer that goes with that, of course, is because the way you have to work is often behind the scenes, it's networking, it's lobbying. And I mean, we gave, this role was given to Ben Seal in our organisation when he was fairly early in his career. And initially there were a bunch of us around him who probably knew vastly more about all of this and how to make things happen, and we were kind of sounding boards for him and all the rest. And he's grown in this role to the point where he takes I think it's fair to say, a massive leadership role, but now he's involved in networks that are way beyond any of us. Now, normally when you're doing things like your succession planning and your business continuity and all the rest of it, you can say, well, what's our like-for-like replacement and this, that and the other, but we've now got a member of staff who's been there a long time, and his informal networking is not, it's not our business to ask what his informal networking is, but we do know that he can have conversations with all sorts of people right through to high levels in Westminster, in Sport Council and all the rest of it. Now, as a risk management thing for our organisation, one of the things that really worries me is that if we were to lose Ben, he's not on our ELT, but by gosh, a lot would disappear. And one of the questions that's starting to preoccupy me is, how do we build some resilience into our advocacy side of things? Because by the very nature of it, advocacy is very hard to pin down in terms of knowledge management and skills and all of those sorts of things. You can bring in another expert, but if they're starting from scratch, you could lose a lot of momentum at a critical time. So there's certainly a lot to consider that is more pointedly different from a lot of conventional wisdom than you see in other areas.
No, thank you, everyone. I am aware of the time and whether people may want to grab a coffee, but I think we have time for possibly one question if anyone can't Let's see if I can see any hands. Is there anyone online?
We'll take one from online. We've got one question come through. Is there a place for us as a small NGB to access a lobbying template regarding retention or loss of facilities?
I don't know about a template, but I'd be happy to, because that's my bread and butter. Sadly, loss of facilities is something we deal with very, very frequently in the swimming world. So I'd be happy to be put in touch with whoever that person was after and pick up with them. So yeah.
Yeah, we can arrange that. Thank you.
Fab. I think that's bang on past. So thank you very much. Can we get a round of applause to the panel, please, everyone? Thank you very much.